thought I was just painting her house. But every brushstroke felt like she was painting me back to life. The first time I saw her house, it looked tired. Not broken, just faded. The kind of place that had once held laughter and warmth but had slowly quieted down. The pale blue paint was peeling near the porch, and the wooden panels wore the years openly. Still, there was something about it, something graceful beneath the wear. She opened the door before I could knock twice. Her presence wasn't loud or demanding. It was calm, grounded, the kind that made you straighten up without realizing it. She wasn't dressed up. A soft cream shirt, hair loosely tied back, strands escaping around her face. But her eyes, sharp, steady, quietly knowing, carried more weight than any words she spoke. "Thank you for coming," she said. And it wasn't just politeness. It sounded like she meant it, like the house itself had been waiting too long for someone to care again. As I unloaded my brushes and color samples, she stood by the window, the sunlight bending around her. The air inside smelled faintly of cedar and something floral, maybe jasmine. She moved with the ease of someone used to silence. Not uncomfortable in it, just used to being alone. We went through shades together. She ran her fingers lightly over the samples, the faint touch of her nails making the paper flutter. "Not too bright," she said softly. "Something that feels like morning light, not afternoon heat." Her words surprised me, not for what she said, but for how she said them. She wasn't talking about paint. She was talking about feeling, about peace. When our fingers brushed over the same color card, the moment lasted a second too long. Her hand was warm, a contrast to the cool card between us. She pulled back gently, her eyes lifting to meet mine. Calm, steady, unreadable. I started working and she stayed nearby, leaning against the doorframe. The sound of the brush against wood filled the silence. She didn't fill it with chatter. She just watched, occasionally asking questions about texture, finish, how long paint took to dry. Her curiosity was quiet but genuine. At one point, I climbed down the ladder to switch brushes. She reached out to steady the bucket before it tipped. Her hand brushed my arm, light, careful, but enough to notice. I caught the faintest trace of her perfume, something clean and understated. Outside, a breeze passed through the open window, carrying in the smell of dry leaves. Inside, time slowed. For a moment, it didn't feel like work. It felt like rhythm. The movement of the brush, the way the light hit the wall, the soft sound of her footsteps as she moved around. She looked at the first coat of paint, smiled slightly. "It already feels lighter," she murmured. I didn't say it out loud, but she was right. The room did feel lighter. Not just the walls. The air between us. That was the first brushstroke. The moment something small began to shift. Not in the house, but somewhere quieter, deeper, somewhere neither of us was ready to name. By the second day, the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It had softened into something comfortable, like the hum of a song you don't notice until it stops. I arrived early, half expecting the house to still feel cold, but she was already awake. The door was slightly open, the faint smell of coffee drifting out. Inside, sunlight spilled across the floorboards, touching everything gold. She stood by the counter, mug in hand, wearing an old linen shirt that hung loosely around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw me, that small, quiet smile that feels like acknowledgement, not habit. "Coffee?" she asked. "Only if you promise not to judge how much sugar I use." Her laugh came out soft but real, the kind that makes you want to earn it again. "No promises," she said, handing me the cup. I got back to work. The room was still half-painted, a line where old color met new. She sat near the window with a book open but never turned the pages. Every now and then, I caught her watching. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable but curious, as if she was trying to understand something beyond the work. When I stepped down from the ladder, she asked, "Do you always work this quietly?" I shrugged. "The paint listens better when I don't talk too much." She smiled at that, shaking her head. "You make it sound like it has feelings." "Maybe it does," I said, glancing at the walls. "Everything absorbs something. Light, sound, even memories." For a moment, she looked at the wall like she was seeing it for the first time. Not the paint, but the years behind it. "I believe that," she whispered. There was a pause, not heavy, but full. Then, like nothing happened, she asked if she could help. I told her the truth, that most people made a mess of it. She insisted anyway, so I showed her how to move the brush evenly. Her hand trembled at first, too much pressure. I placed my hand lightly over hers, not to guide, but to steady. "Like this," I said quietly. She adjusted, her breath catching as our shoulders brushed. Her skin was warm. The paintbrush trembled slightly between our fingers. When she pulled back, a streak of paint landed on her wrist. She laughed, a small, surprised sound, then wiped it with the edge of her shirt, leaving a faint smear. "Guess I'm part of the wall now." I grinned. Could be worse places to belong. The afternoon light shifted, spilling deeper into the room. We worked slower, not because there was more to do, but because neither of us seemed in a hurry for the silence to end. By the time I packed up, the room had changed, not just in color, but in weight. Felt warmer, somehow lived in again. She stood by the doorway as I left, eyes following me to the porch. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. And for the first time in a long while, I meant it. The sky turned gray before noon, the kind of gray that promised more than drizzle. I reached her house just as the first drops began to fall. She opened the door before I could knock, hair slightly messy, an oversized sweater draped around her shoulders. "You made it," she said softly, glancing past me at the clouds. "You might be stuck here for a while." I smiled. "I've been in worse places." Thunder rolled in the distance as I set up inside. The usual warmth of daylight was gone. Everything was washed in the soft, shifting light of an oncoming storm. I started painting near the window, and she hovered nearby, her voice quieter than usual, like the storm outside had softened everything between us. After a while, she said, "You don't have to keep working. The light's too dull. Sit, please." There was something about the way she said it, gentle but certain. So I did. She poured tea into 2 mismatched cups, the faint scent of lemon and honey filling the air. We sat across from each other at the small wooden table, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. "It's strange," she said after a long pause. "How a house can feel alive when someone else is in it." I looked around. The walls were halfway done, uneven, imperfect, but I could already see what she meant. "Maybe it's not the house," I said. "Maybe it's the people." She smiled, looking down at her cup. "That's what my husband used to say." The air stilled for a moment. I didn't know if I should speak or stay quiet, so I just listened. She continued, voice low. "He was gone a lot. Work, travel. Life just happens, you know? And when it stopped happening, the house started to feel too big, too quiet." I watched the way she ran her finger along the rim of the cup. Slow, thoughtful. The rain grew heavier, running down the windows in restless streaks. "I'm sorry," I said finally. She shook her head. "Don't be. It's been years. You don't miss the person after a while. You miss the presence. The sound of someone else moving around. The small noises that remind you you're not alone." I nodded, understanding more than I expected to. "Maybe that's why you wanted the house painted." She looked up, meeting my eyes. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe I just needed someone to see it again, the way it used to feel." For a few seconds we just sat there, the storm surrounding us, the air thick with something unspoken. Her eyes lingered on mine, and I could see it. The loneliness she never said out loud, and the strength it took to carry it. Lightning flashed through the window, lighting up her face. And in that instant, I realized something had shifted. The walls, the paint, they weren't what I was fixing anymore. It was something far quieter, something inside her, and maybe something inside me too. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean. When I returned the next morning, her garden still glistened with rain. The air smelled of damp earth and jasmine, that same scent that always seemed to follow her. She opened the door before I could knock, smiling in that calm, unhurried way of hers. "You came back," she said softly, almost as if she hadn't expected me to. I said I would, I replied. And I've got a wall waiting to be finished. She laughed. A sound lighter than yesterday, but still quiet enough to feel like a secret. Inside, the room looked different. Maybe it was the light, or maybe it was her. She had her sleeves rolled up, a loose gray shirt tucked carelessly into jeans, a paintbrush already in her hand. I thought I'd try helping again, she said, holding it up like a challenge. I grinned. You sure you're ready to risk the walls? She tilted her head, feigning seriousness. You underestimate me. So we painted together. The sound of the brush gliding against the wall was soft, steady, almost like breathing. Sometimes our arms brushed when we reached for the same spot, and each time, neither of us moved away quickly. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence, just the quiet rhythm of color spreading across the room. After a while, I noticed a streak of blue-green paint on her cheek. You've got something here, I said, pointing. She touched the wrong side. No, the other? I leaned in before finishing the sentence, gently brushing my thumb against her skin. Her breath caught. My hand lingered for a moment longer than it should have, the warmth of her cheek soft under my fingers. She looked at me. Not startled, not embarrassed, just still. The kind of stillness that carries weight. Got it? I murmured, stepping back slowly. She smiled faintly, almost shyly, the first time I'd seen that kind of softness in her. Then, without a word, she dipped her brush into the paint and, with a mischievous glint, drew a faint line across the back of my hand. I looked at the mark, then at her. That's war, you know? Then fight back, she said, laughing under her breath. And for a few seconds, we weren't painter and client. We were just two people caught between laughter and silence, between touch and hesitation. When the laughter faded, we both stood there, brushes in hand, the scent of paint hanging between us. The walls gleamed fresh and bright, the color soft but alive, just like the air around us. She finally said, "You have a patient way of working." I shrugged, meeting her gaze. Some things shouldn't be rushed. Her eyes lingered on me a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned back to the wall, voice barely above a whisper. I'm starting to see that. And in that quiet, with paint drying and sunlight shifting through the window, I realized something simple. This house wasn't the only thing slowly coming back to life. By the time we reached the last room, the house felt completely different, brighter, warmer, alive again. Every wall seemed to hold something between us. Shared silences, small laughs, words we never quite said out loud. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall window, spreading across the half-finished wall like spilled honey. She stood near it, her hands speckled with faint traces of paint. The color we'd chosen, a soft, creamy hue, caught the light just right, wrapping her in a quiet glow. It looks perfect, she said softly, stepping back to admire it. I looked at the wall, then at her. It's getting there, I said, but what I meant was she looks perfect. She turned, catching my gaze, and for a second I wondered if she'd heard the words I didn't say. She didn't look away, not immediately. Her eyes lingered, studying me with that same calm focus she'd had since the day we met. But now there was something else behind it, something warmer, gentler. I set my brush down, wiping my hands on a rag. Once this dries, it's done, I said. You'll have your house back. She smiled, but there was a flicker in her expression, something like hesitation. Funny, she said quietly. Now that it's almost finished, I'm not sure I want it to be. Her words hung there, light but heavy at the same time. I tried to answer, but the right words didn't come. So I just stood there, watching as she walked slowly toward the window. The sunlight hit her hair, turning a few strands gold. She spoke again, voice soft. Do you always leave when your work is done? I hesitated. Usually. Why? I took a breath, thinking. Because that's how it works. People hire me to fix walls, not to stay behind them. She nodded, her gaze drifting to the floor. I suppose that makes sense. But her tone said something else entirely. Something quieter, lonelier. I took a few steps closer. Sometimes, I said, it's not about the walls. It's about who's inside them. She looked up at that. The silence between us stretched thin. Not uncomfortable, just full. Her eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Outside, the day began to fade, shadows stretching long across the floor. The sound of birds settling into the trees filtered through the open window. Inside, everything slowed, like time had folded into a still, fragile moment. She broke the silence first, her voice almost a whisper. You make this house feel like it's breathing again. I smiled. Maybe it just needed someone to see it the way it was meant to be. For a second, I thought she might say something more, something that would change everything. But instead, she just turned back to the wall, fingertips brushing the fresh paint. The light slipped lower, painting both of us in gold. And though I didn't say it out loud, I already knew. When this house was finished, walking away wouldn't be easy. The final brushstroke came just before dusk. The room glowed faintly in the soft orange light of evening, the paint still drying but already transforming the space. I stood back, brush hanging loosely in my hand, feeling that strange mix of satisfaction and reluctance that always came when a project neared its end. She was quiet, standing by the doorway, her arms crossed loosely, eyes tracing every corner like she was memorizing it. It's beautiful, she whispered finally. Then, after a pause, you've given it life again. I smiled faintly. All I did was add color. She looked at me then, really looked. No, she said softly. You reminded it what warmth feels like. The words landed heavier than she meant them to, and for a moment neither of us moved. Outside, the sun was sinking behind the trees, the world turning gold and gray at once. The scent of fresh paint mixed with the faint aroma of tea she'd brewed earlier. The air felt still. I began cleaning my brushes, methodically packing my things, trying to ignore the way her eyes followed every movement. It wasn't just politeness, it was something deeper, something like reluctance. So that's it then? She asked quietly. That's it, I said, forcing a small smile. You've got your house back. She stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. And what about you? I froze for a second. Me? She nodded. Do you ever stay? Her voice was soft, but her words hung heavy in the space between us. I looked at her, at the way her fingers rested lightly on the freshly painted wall, the way her expression hovered between strength and vulnerability. I set the brush down. No, I said honestly. I don't stay. I just help people rebuild, then move on. Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again, steadier this time. That sounds lonely. I didn't have an answer, maybe because she was right. She took a slow step forward, her presence close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her body in the cooling room. You know, she murmured, running her fingers along the edge of the wall. Now that it's perfect. Her voice trailed off, but the silence spoke for her. I swallowed, heart thudding quietly. What? I asked, though I already knew. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. Calm, unwavering, but full of something I couldn't mistake anymore. Now that it's perfect, she said slowly. Stay inside with me. The world seemed to stop. The fading light caught her hair. The room bathed in the color we'd chosen together. Soft, warm, alive. Her hand rested against the wall, the same one I'd painted just hours ago, as if she was holding on to both the house and the moment. I didn't move, didn't speak, afraid that if I did, the spell would break. All I knew was that, for the first time, leaving didn't feel like an option. It felt like walking away from something that had just started breathing. For a long moment after she spoke, the room stayed perfectly still. Her words seemed to hang in the quiet like the faint scent of paint in the air. Something new, something that hadn't quite settled yet. Now that it's perfect, stay inside with me. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. The way the golden light fell across her face. How her hand rested gently against the wall we'd painted together. There was no hesitation in her eyes, just an openness, a kind of peace that only comes when you stop fighting what your heart already knows. I took a slow step closer, close enough to see the faint freckles on her skin, the small streak of dried paint still clinging to the edge of her wrist. She didn't move away. I don't know if I'd fit, I said quietly, not sure what else to say. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. You already do. The air between us felt alive again, like the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, the world had softened, the chirping of crickets blending with the last hum of daylight. Inside, the glow from the single lamp painted everything in warm amber tones. We sat down on the floor, leaning against the freshly painted wall. For once, there was no work left to do. No brushes, no ladders, no excuses. Just quiet. Just us. She handed me a cup of tea, steam curling between us. You said once, she murmured, that paint absorbs memories. I nodded. It does. Then I hope these walls remember this, she said softly. I looked around, at the walls, the floor, the light, and realized she was right. This place wasn't just repainted. It was reborn. After a long pause, I said, You don't really need me to stay. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. Maybe not, but maybe wanting someone is enough. Her voice was calm, steady, but I could feel the faint tremor in it, the kind that comes from saying something you've been holding back for too long. I didn't reply. I just let the silence answer for both of us. The house felt different now, not just brighter, but warmer. Every sound, the tick of the clock, the rustle of the curtains, carried a quiet kind of intimacy. It felt like the walls themselves were listening, as if they understood the weight of what was happening inside them. Outside, the rain that had once trapped us here was only a memory. Inside, the air was still, the kind of stillness that only comes when something long unsettled finally finds rest. She closed her eyes, her hand finding mine. It's strange, she whispered. You came here to fix a house. And somehow you fixed me too. I looked at her, at the way her lips curved softly when she smiled, and for the first time, I realized something simple. Maybe I hadn't come here to fix anything. Maybe I'd been the one waiting to be restored. And in that quiet, with the scent of paint still lingering, I finally understood. Some homes aren't built, they're found.